Hello AmericansChannel. This video is made by free videos from Storyblocks, and these images and video we use just for explanation, and it's free use also. Brenda's heart was racing as she looked around Stacey's room in panic. She was sure she had heard a child crying just a moment ago. As she started moving the cushions and stuffed toys nestled near the window, she discovered something that made her heart nearly stop. She found a baby, no more than a few months old, nestled quietly among the stuffed toys. The shock was overwhelming and Brenda's mind raced with bizarre thoughts and pressing questions. How could this have happened right under her nose? Brenda gathered herself from the initial shock and confronted Stacey, hoping that there was a logical reason for this madness. But the truth that spilled from Stacey's lips was beyond anything Brenda could have imagined. Brenda lived a quiet life on Daffodil Street with her 13-year-old daughter, Stacey. As a single mom, she worked hard to rebuild their lives after a painful divorce. Their modest home was her sanctuary, a space she had lovingly created to give Stacey the stability she herself often longed for. Mom faints when she finds a hidden baby in daughter's 13 room. Then she confesses the truth. Working as a nurse at the local hospital, Brenda's days were long and exhausting. She often left before sunrise and returned past midnight, her interactions with Stacey limited to hurried goodnights. Yet, despite the grueling schedule, every effort was worth it to provide a comfortable life for her daughter. It was a rare Saturday afternoon when Brenda arrived home early. Typically, her shifts stretched late into the night, leaving little time to see Stacey. But today was different, and unexpected overlap in schedules meant she could leave after her morning rounds. Thrilled, she seized the chance to surprise her daughter. As Brenda entered the house, she noticed Stacey's startled expression. She dismissed it as surprise at seeing her home so early for once. Smiling, she headed straight to the kitchen, eager to prepare a proper lunch, something she hadn't done in weeks. As she chopped vegetables, an unfamiliar sound broke the silence. Brenda froze, straining to listen and figure out the source of the noise. It sounded like the crying of a baby. Her pulse quickened. A baby? Here? She couldn't comprehend what she was hearing. Brenda's heart pounded as the cry echoed through the house. Wiping her hands on a kitchen towel, she called out, "Stacey." "Come downstairs." For a moment her voice was calm, but panic brewed beneath the surface. Footsteps thudded on the stairs as Stacey appeared, her face pale and frazzled. "Did you hear that?" Brenda asked, trying to steady her voice. "A baby crying." Stacey hesitated for a moment, then quickly said, "Oh, that's just a video I'm watching for my home science project. I'm editing it for a presentation." Her explanation came with a small, nervous laugh, and she averted her gaze. Brenda's shoulders relaxed, though unease lingered in her chest. "All right, then," she replied, forcing a smile. "You scared me for a moment." She turned back to the cutting board, resuming her task. Stacey hovered in the doorway briefly, her fingers fidgeting, before her phone buzzed. "I need to take this," Stacey mumbled, already heading toward the back door. Brenda glanced over her shoulder, confused. Stacey usually answered calls in her room. Why was she stepping out into the backyard? Something about it struck her as odd, but she shook it off and focused on preparing lunch. As she chopped vegetables, Brenda's mind wandered. Stacey had been acting strange lately. She spent most of her time in her room, barely emerging to talk or eat. Gone were the days when she shared every detail of her life. Was this just teenage behavior, or was something else going on? Brenda sighed. Her demanding job left little time to spend with Stacey, and perhaps the growing distance was simply a natural part of her daughter craving independence. Still, the thought tugged at her. They used to be so close. When did everything start to change? A baby's cry interrupted her thoughts again, this time louder and more distinct. Brenda froze, gripping the knife tightly. Stacey wasn't even in the house, and no video was playing. Her pulse quickened as realization set in. Something was wrong, very wrong. Brenda set the knife down and moved toward the living room, her ears straining to catch the faint cry again. The sound was unmistakable now, and seemed to be coming from upstairs. Her chest tightened as she glanced at the staircase. Stacey's room, was it coming from there? Her heart raced as she began climbing the stairs, each step slower than the last. A cold sweat formed on her brow, and her pulse pounded in her ears. Reaching Stacey's door, she hesitated. The sound continued, soft but steady. Taking a deep breath, Brenda pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was neat, as usual, with a few books scattered on Stacey's desk and clothes folded on her chair. Brenda glanced around, the crying still audible but with no clear source. She frowned, stepping further in. It sounded close now, almost as if it were coming from the window seat. Brenda moved toward the window seat, her chest tightening as the sound grew louder with each step. Her hands trembled as she began pulling away the cushions and stuffed toys stacked neatly on the seat. And then she froze. Nestled beneath the pile was a baby, a real, living baby. The infant's tiny face scrunched up, letting out another soft cry. Brenda's heart stopped, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. She stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the desk for support, her breathing uneven. A baby? Here? In Stacey's room? Her entire body went cold. Shock coursed through Brenda as she stared at the infant. Her mind raced with questions. What was a baby doing in Stacey's room? Where did it come from? Whose baby was this? Her hands trembled as she crouched down, her thoughts spiraling into panic. Had she missed something? Had she been so consumed with work that she failed to notice something crucial about her own daughter? Guilt washed over her as she thought of her long hours, and the night spent too exhausted to ask Stacey about her day. What if this was her fault? Her mind spun with terrifying possibilities. Were there visitors or friends Brenda didn't know about? The thought that she might not know her daughter at all made her stomach churn. She sat frozen, staring at the baby, as the sound of footsteps approached. The door creaked open, and Stacey stepped inside, her face pale. She froze when she saw Brenda by the window, holding the baby. Tears welled in her eyes, and she bit her lip as she looked at her mother. Brenda's voice was low but firm. "What's all this, Stacey?" Stacey didn't reply. Her lower lip trembled as tears spilled down her cheeks. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came. Instead, she stood frozen, silent except for the sound of her quiet sobs, her mother's horrified gaze locked onto her. Brenda's head swirled with confusion and panic as the baby's cries grew louder and more urgent. Her breath caught when she noticed the baby's lips turning faintly blue, its tiny body trembling with exhaustion. Snapping out of her shock, Brenda quickly wrapped the infant snugly in a blanket, her hands shaking. "It's okay. Shach." "It's okay," Brenda murmured, rocking the baby gently, her voice trembling with desperation. She cradled the fragile little body, her heart pounding as the cries softened, though the baby's labored breathing still worried her. Grabbing her phone, she called their family doctor. "Dr. Lawson, it's an emergency," Brenda said, her voice breaking. She gave him their address and pleaded for a house visit. Hanging up, she paced the room, glancing at the baby in her arms, who now seemed far too delicate for this world. Her pulse raced as the minutes dragged on. Stacey sat silently on her bed, her face buried in a pillow. She hugged it tightly, her shoulders trembling. Brenda wanted to demand answers needed too, but held back. The baby's safety came first. Forcing answers out of Stacey now would only escalate the tension hanging thickly in the air. The sound of the doorbell broke the tense silence. Brenda rushed downstairs, still cradling the baby, and let Dr. Lawson in. He moved with practiced precision, his kind but firm demeanor bringing a brief sense of calm. After a thorough examination, he turned to Brenda. "The baby is stable," Dr. Lawson said, carefully wrapping his stethoscope. "But it's clear they've been crying excessively and need proper feeding and care. A baby this young can't afford any neglect." His voice was gentle, but his words carried an undeniable urgency. "Thank you," Dr. Brenda murmured, her shoulders sagging in relief. "Whose baby is it?" Dr. Lawson asked, his eyes narrowing slightly as they flicked toward Stacey. Brenda hesitated. "I don't know. I found it today," she admitted quietly. The doctor nodded gravely, making notes in his pad. "Then we need to act fast," he said. Brenda glanced at Stacey, who had barely moved. "Stacey," she began cautiously, "I need you to tell me what's going on." Her voice cracked with frustration, but she softened it. Stacey only shook her head, tears streaming down her face, her silence louder than any answer she could have given. The room was heavy with tension as Brenda felt her patience fraying. Her mind screamed for answers, but deep down, she knew pushing too hard could make Stacey shut down entirely. For now, Brenda could only wait, though every second of silence felt like an eternity. Dr. Lawson finished packing his bag and turned to Brenda, his expression firm. "Given the situation, I strongly suggest contacting Child Protective Services," he said. Brenda's stomach twisted. "Are you sure, doctor?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He nodded solemnly. "We need to ensure the baby's safety." They can help. Brenda's mind raced at the implications. CPS meant opening their home and Stacey's life to scrutiny. She glanced at her daughter, who was now sobbing uncontrollably into her pillow. Stacey's distress deepened with every mention of CPS, making it clear this situation was far from simple. "Mom, please don't." Stacey's muffled voice broke through her sobs, but she wouldn't lift her head. Brenda hesitated, her heart torn between protecting the baby and shielding Stacey. She reached out to comfort her daughter, but Stacey recoiled, burying herself deeper into the pillow. Dr. Lawson got an emergency call and left in a rush, but not without giving Brenda the reassurance that he'd be calling her later to discuss the matter. After the doctor left, Brenda paced the living room, her thoughts chaotic. Calling CPS seemed logical, yet something in Stacey's reaction made her pause. Determined to protect both the baby and Stacey, she decided to hold off until she had more answers. She needed to get through to her daughter first. Brenda returned to Stacey's room and sat down gently on the edge of the bed. "Stacey, I need you to help me understand," she began softly. "Who have you been spending time with lately? Have any of your friends been acting strange?" She kept her tone calm, hoping it would ease her daughter. Stacey hesitated, her face still hidden. "I don't know, Mom," she muttered, her voice barely audible. After a long pause, she added, I don't want to get anyone into trouble." Brenda's heart sank. This small admission hinted at a larger story, but it wasn't enough. Brenda's mind was filled with wild scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. Had Stacey been pressured into something dangerous? Surely it couldn't be her baby, can it? Had she gotten herself embroiled in some criminal activity? The unanswered questions clawed at her, and the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm her. She needed the truth, and fast. Brenda sighed deeply, realizing that Stacey wasn't ready to open up. If Stacey wouldn't talk, she'd have to figure it out herself. Determined, she decided to investigate. She began by going through Stacey's phone, laptop, and emails, meticulously combing through messages, social media, and search history for any clues. Despite her thorough search, nothing stood out. No suspicious messages, no hidden accounts, no conversations that hinted at where the baby might have come from. It left her more frustrated than before. How could there be no trace? Her hands shook as she closed the laptop, anxiety tightening her chest. Her thoughts spiraled. What if Stacey was involved in something far more dangerous than she could imagine? What if someone had coerced her into hiding this baby? Brenda's mind teemed with terrifying possibilities, each one worse than the last. She had to get answers, and quickly. Sitting in the silence of the living room, Brenda racked her brain, trying to recall anything unusual in recent months. That's when she remembered her neighbor mentioning a car parked outside her home for hours while she was at work. She hadn't thought much of it then, but now it seemed significant. Brenda decided to call all her neighbors one by one, determined to get more information. She walked door to door, asking neighbors if they'd noticed anything strange around her house lately. She kept her tone casual, careful not to raise suspicion, though the urgency in her voice was hard to hide. For the first few houses, her questions led nowhere. Most neighbors didn't see or hear anything unusual, offering polite but unhelpful responses. Just as she began to lose hope, a woman a few houses down hesitated before speaking. "Actually, I did see someone strange a few weeks ago," she said thoughtfully. Brenda's pulse quickened. "What did you see?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The neighbor took a pause, recalling the details. "There was a person in a black hoodie standing near your door. They had something in their arms and kept looking over their shoulder, like they didn't want to be seen." Her words sent chills down Brenda's spine. The description was vague, but it was enough to set her mind racing. Was this person connected to the baby? Had they been watching her house? Fear gripped her as she tried to piece together the fragments of the mystery. Brenda thanked the neighbor and ended the call, her thoughts spinning. Was Stacey hiding from this person? Could they be dangerous? The fear in Stacey's eyes, her refusal to talk at all, pointed to something serious. Brenda's stomach churned as she imagined the worst-case scenarios. Brenda stood in the hallway, staring up at Stacey's room. Whatever this was, it wasn't simple. Stacey's fear wasn't just guilt, it was something deeper. Brenda clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. She needed to protect her daughter and the baby, no matter what it took. Brenda sat on the edge of the couch, clutching her phone tightly. Her desperation to understand what was happening in Stacey's life led her to call Stacey's best friend, Emma. "Hi, Emma," Brenda began, trying to sound casual. "I just wanted to check, has Stacey been okay lately? Has she said anything unusual?" Emma hesitated. "Well, she hasn't been hanging out with us much," Emma admitted. "She's been spending time with some older friend. I don't know much about them. Stacey never introduced us, but she seems to be with them a lot after school." Emma's words sent a chill down Brenda's spine. Brenda's heart sank as she pressed further. Did Stacey say anything about this person? Anything at all? Emma's reply was vague but unsettling. "Not really. Just that they're kind of helping her with something. But she's been really quiet about it. It's weird." The ominous phrase "older friend" echoed in Brenda's mind long after the call ended. Who was this person? How old were they? The lack of details gnawed at her. Had this person manipulated Stacey into something dangerous? Was this why Stacey was too scared to reveal the truth? That night, sleep eluded Brenda. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind conjured terrifying scenarios. What if this mysterious figure was controlling Stacey? What if the baby was connected to something illegal or dangerous? She knew she couldn't sit idly by any longer. She had to take action. The next morning, Brenda went through her usual routine, acting as though she was heading to work. She kissed Stacey goodbye and left the house, but instead of driving to the hospital, she parked her car a few streets away, positioning herself where she could see her front door. Hours passed and Brenda's anxiety grew with each minute. Nothing unusual happened. She began doubting her plan when the afternoon turned into evening. But just as she was about to give up, a shadowy figure appeared at the end of the street, moving cautiously toward her house. Brenda's breath caught as the figure approached her front door. Clad in a black hoodie, they moved with nervous energy, constantly glancing over their shoulder. Brenda watched, heart pounding, as the person rang the doorbell. Moments later, Stacey opened the door and let them in. The sight sent Brenda into a frenzy. Her mind screamed for answers and adrenaline coursed through her veins. Without thinking, she leapt out of her car and ran toward the house, her footsteps echoing in the quiet evening. She had to confront this person, she had to know the truth. Brenda flung open the front door, her heart thundering in her chest. Stacey and the hooded figure froze, their faces reflecting equal parts shock and fear. Brenda's voice shook as she demanded, "Who are you? And what is going on here?" The tension in the room was palpable. Brenda's breath hitched as the hooded figure slowly pulled back their hood. She had expected a man, perhaps older and threatening, but standing before her was a girl barely out of her teens. The young woman's face was pale, her wide eyes filled with fear and vulnerability. For a moment, Brenda's anger ebbed, replaced by confusion and a maternal instinct to protect. She steadied herself, glancing between Stacey and the girl. "All right," Brenda said, her voice firm but measured. "We're going to sit down, and you're going to tell me everything. No more secrets." The three moved into the living room. Grace perched on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling as she fidgeted with the hem of her hoodie. Stacey sat beside her, silent but visibly anxious. Brenda sat across from them, her gaze unwavering. "What's your name?" she asked the girl sharply. "Grace," she murmured, barely audible. She cleared her throat, trying again. "My name is Grace. I live a few blocks away. Stacey and I met a couple of weeks ago. At the grocery store." Her voice wavered as she avoided Brenda's piercing gaze. "And the baby?" Brenda pressed, her tone icy yet controlled. "What's going on with the baby, Grace? Start talking." Grace swallowed hard, glancing at Stacey for reassurance. When Stacey gave her a subtle nod, Grace took a shaky breath and began. "The baby is mine," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "I had him with my boyfriend. But my parents don't know about him. They can't know." She looked down, her tears splashing onto her trembling hands. Brenda leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Why?" she demanded. "Why can't they know? What are you so afraid of? Grace's lip quivered as she spoke, her words tumbling out in a torrent of emotion. Because they'll ruin everything. They'll disown me. Or worse, they'll take him away from me. She looked up at Brenda, her eyes pleading. They're part of a conservative community, super strict. If they find out I had a baby out of wedlock, it'll destroy them. They'll say I've shamed the family, and they'll send him away. I couldn't let that happen. Brenda's stomach churned as she listened, her gaze shifting to Stacey, who looked like she wanted to disappear. So, you thought the best solution was to leave your baby here? Brenda asked, incredulous. With my 13-year-old daughter? What were you thinking, Grace? Grace flinched at the sharpness of Brenda's words but forced herself to continue. I didn't know what else to do, she cried. I was too scared of losing my baby, and Stacey was the only one who offered to help. Brenda's gaze softened as Grace's pleas echoed in the room. The desperation in her voice, the fear in her eyes, it was impossible to ignore. Brenda's heart broke for the young girl, caught between her love for her child and the crushing weight of her parents' expectations. Taking a deep breath, Brenda leaned forward and spoke gently. Grace, I understand you're scared, but hiding like this isn't the solution. You're not alone in this, and you don't have to do it all by yourself. Let me help you figure this out. Her words carried a quiet reassurance that seemed to ease Grace's trembling. As a nurse, Brenda had seen her fair share of challenging situations, and she knew this required professional guidance. The next morning, she made a few calls and arranged for Grace to meet with a counselor at a local shelter specializing in helping young mothers. They'll listen, Brenda said, and they'll help you find a way to navigate this. Over the next few days, Brenda stayed by Grace's side, driving her to appointments and sitting with her during counseling sessions. The shelter offered Grace resources and support, from parenting classes to a plan for financial independence. Brenda was determined to ensure that Grace had a safety net, no matter the outcome with her family. One evening, Brenda gave Grace a heartfelt pep talk. You have to tell them, Grace. It won't be easy, and they might not react the way you hope, but the truth is the only way forward. You deserve to raise your child without living in fear. Grace nodded, tears welling in her eyes, but a spark of determination igniting within her. With Brenda's support, Grace worked up the courage to speak to her parents. On the day of the meeting, Brenda accompanied her, standing silently by her side as Grace faced her family. She revealed everything: the baby, the boyfriend, and her desperate attempts to keep it hidden. Her parents' reaction was immediate and harsh. How could you bring this shame upon us? Her father demanded, his voice trembling with anger. Her mother sobbed, refusing to look at her. Grace stood firm, despite the pain in her eyes, and explained, I love my son. I didn't tell you because I was afraid you'd take him away, but I can't live like this anymore. Brenda stepped in, her voice steady but firm. Grace hid this out of fear, not defiance. She thought you'd disown her, or worse. She's a good mother who made a mistake, because she didn't feel safe telling you the truth. Please, don't let your judgment push her further away. The words seemed to cut through the tension. Grace's parents exchanged a long look, their stern expressions softening. After a heavy silence, her father finally spoke, his voice quieter now. We don't agree with how you handled this, Grace, but we're your parents. We'll support you and your son. In the weeks that followed, Grace's family began to adjust to the new reality. Though their acceptance came slowly, they eventually embraced Grace's son as their grandchild. Grace also found strength in the shelter's resources and Brenda's unwavering support, carving out a path toward stability and independence. For Brenda and Stacey, the experience brought them closer than ever. One evening, as they sat on the couch together, Brenda took Stacey's hand. No more secrets. Okay, Stacey nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Okay, Mom. The promise marked a new chapter in their relationship, one built on trust and understanding. In the end, the experience became a profound turning point for Brenda and Stacey. It reminded them of the importance of openness and trust, strengthening their bond like never before. Their home, once shadowed by secrets, became a space of honesty and understanding, a haven where nothing was too difficult to face together.